Here is how I would treat an anterior open bite case in an adult. So she's very narrow, so we absolutely want to expand through the premolars. And because she is so narrow arched, we do want to expand and upright these lingually inclined molars. But we still need to do that very carefully because even if we translate a lingually inclined molar, it can still tip buckle so that it will end up vertical, but I've also seen them tip further buckle than what we're looking for because of the palatal root, and then these teeth are really winged out. Fortunately, if she were to get some posterior open bite or even second molar intrusion because bite ramps can't be used, that is going to help reduce the OVD and bring the anterior teeth together without as much extrusion. So this plan was initially set up with some preferences called the Galler engine that limit the molar movement and put retention attachments everywhere we can. And the software added IPR because she is a little bit class 2. And with this maximum amount of IPR, that would call for some anchorage to prevent the molars from tipping mesial. As when we create all those spaces, it could technically, from the software standpoint, be a retraction case, although that's not really the case here so much. So I'm going to show how I would treat these molars. So knowing that molars will tend to tip buckle. So let me give you an example. When doing molar pure translation, the tooth will end up clinically doing this type of movement as well. And although we want to upright it, just like we want to do more uprighting and translating of the premolars, what I've also seen is this effect to happen clinically. So to work against that, we want to plan there to be no buccal tipping on the ClinCheck. And I'm actually going to add a little bit of lingual crown tipping while still doing a lot more translation on the ClinCheck. So then clinically, we should have an upright tooth without it being a posterior open bite. I like to do the maxillary teeth visually until it looks like they are in a better arch form. So that looks reasonable to me as far as alignment with the second molars. And then I'm going to add some lingual crown tip, and this is just so that on the ClinCheck, so clinically, we end up in a safe zone. We don't have to worry about that nearly as much with premolars because they are single-rooted teeth. Even the first premolars, they do have a palatal cusp, but it's not as long in bone or separated in bone as we would see with maxillary molars. So now I want to bring the first molars more in the arch form that we set up for the molars and then canines as well. And when we do this type of expansion, and it can be with translation or with tipping, then we see the anterior round out a little bit and we get that more rounded U-shape arch rather than the V-shape arch. And you can see how some of those 0.5 millimeters of IPR have already dropped down. I'm going to make sure that this tooth is rotated in, although that's not my primary concern right now. So now I've set this up for the upper arch. I could write back to the technicians and say, please do crown tipping of the lower premolars to match the upper. That can save you some time because I think the CAD designers would understand that. I'm just going to go ahead and do things more with the 3D controls. And this type of movement, crown tipping, is meant, although there's numbers right here that look like the roots are moving, and the roots typically, it's not a completely fixed system where we can control exactly how every crown and root are going to move. But it really is more crown tipping. And when we do that, we're more safe to keep these teeth within the buccal bone as I don't have a cone beam to evaluate that right now. So I'm going to set up these arches more individually so they look like they're in a good arch form. Because clinically, we don't know exactly where the bite is going to land. And get this to have still some overjet, not a ton. And we definitely want to bring this canine down and with the amount of extrusion that's planned, and there's only a few degrees of rotation, we can reduce some of this rotation because it's not going to make a very big impact on the case. Then extrude rotation attachment won't be needed. We could do an optimized extrusion attachment. With bigger canines, I find that the optimized extrusion attachments are actually a little bit too small. So I like to make my own. I always like optimized attachments when we can use them because they have actually a force built into the aligner system to put more pressure, but I do want a bigger attachment. So I'm doing this similar type wedge shape that you would see with an extrusion attachment, but it's much larger and more towards the incisal edge. Now that we are not doing as much anterior retraction. We can then put retention attachments on. And for the molar buccal movement, I should have said this earlier, we absolutely need the optimized expansion support attachment. We would see a lot more uncontrolled buccal tipping if we didn't have that in place. So this gives you an idea of how I would set up this anterior open bite. And from there, we can do a little bit less extrusion of the anterior teeth on the ClinCheck, knowing that the posterior may possibly intrude. We might reduce our OVD, and then this interocclusal space should be less clinically. So I'm going to wait for these. I'll send this to the CAD designers for updates. Let me know if you have any other questions.